maybe you are.
I think.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So, welcome. My name is Madubuko Diakité, and I've been living in Sweden since 1970. 68, I came as a tourist. I'm a human rights lawyer, licensed at the University, Faculty of Law, and I give lectures and do research on human rights of mainly, my main concern is the identity and the human rights for people known as Afro-Swedes, or people of Afro-Swedish descent. We can get into the interpretation of who these people are in a few minutes. And you are?
I am Emerita McEachrane Balai, alias Kwame Toure. I'm an anthropologist and a freelance journalist, and I blog as well.
My name is McEachrane, and I was born in Sweden in 1970. And I've got a PhD in philosophy, and I would describe myself as a scholar activist. Yes.
I forgot to mention I was born in Harlem, New York, and before I came to Sweden, I had a vast experience, not only in Harlem, New York, but in West Africa, where I had a stepfather who took care of us, and I was a young teenager, saved me from the ghettos of Harlem in the 50s and 60s, and that's also. But here we are today, and one of the biggest questions that we all have here in Sweden, we're all living here in Sweden, and we've been living here, almost all of us, the three of us, our whole adult lives. And within the past 10 years, a major question has come up, which I think would be good if we can address, and we should look into it again further on. And that question is, who are Afro-Swedes? I use the words Afro-Swedish, but has that really been, do we have any questions around this word Afro-Swedish? Who is an Afro-Swede?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good question. Myself, I was born and bred in Addis Ababa, and I am of Eritrean nationality, and I have lived in here for almost 25 years. I came in here in November '89 because of the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So this definition of Africans with a Swedish sort of connection as Afro-Swedes is actually, for me, is something that has existed for the last probably 10-15 years. I never heard about it before, and when I hear this concept of Afro-Swedes, of course it gives me different associations. What does it mean to be Afro-Swede on an individual level or on a collective level? Africans who have been in Sweden for a long time and who speak Swedish, who are integrated in the Swedish society, do we mean this group of people are Afro-Swedes, or are we talking about Africans who are born and bred like Michael in here, who are, for me, culturally, linguistically Swedes? They are still included in this categorization as Afro-Swedes as well. So I think we have to deconstruct this terminology. We might be generalizing, a bunch of people with African origin and who have lived in Sweden for some time, and we call them Afro-Swedes. But I don't think that's the right way of describing the whole group. We should probably go on an individual level and try to de-dramatize the whole issue of this Afro-Swedes. What is the purpose of calling the whole group as Afro-Swedes? Who came up with that idea of calling this group as Afro-Swedes? And what is its final destination? What do we mean by that one? I mean, it doesn't give you sort of space for an individual identity as such. You are Afro-Swedes, but we don't know what it means. What does it entail? What does it somehow apply in current day Sweden?
Yeah, Michael, what do you think?
Okay, so I think that the term Afro-Swede is very important and useful. And I think the history of it is it arose and became popularized beginning in the 1990s with the founding of the National Association of Afro-Swedes, and I think that organization, more than anyone else, have popularized the term, and then it has become increasingly popular, and especially just in the past 5, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. Yes, and it has become an increasingly popular term in media too, the term Afro-Swede. Now, I think how it is most commonly used, and I am also sympathetic to that use, is to say that any person of African descent living in Sweden is an Afro-Swede. So if you are first generation immigrant from the African continent, if you are second generation, if only one of your parents is from the continent or anywhere in the African diaspora, if you're an Afro-Swede. So it is an inclusive, broad term for black people in Sweden. Now, of course, and I think, it's some might even want to prefer to speak of Afro-Swedes, and maybe even some might even prefer to see themselves as Afro-Swedes rather than black. I have heard some Afro-Swedes that do not even like the term black. They prefer to call themselves brown, for instance, but they might still be comfortable with the term Afro-Swede. So I think it's a very broad and inclusive term. I also think it is an important term for political reasons, because people of African descent in Sweden are not at least not unequivocally included in the nation of Sweden. And so they are, to various degrees, or at least in some circumstances, always excluded, and to some degree always marginalized, at least in some contexts, and the discrimination against people of African descent in Sweden is major. And so for that reason, in order to change that situation, to rectify that situation, I think it is very important to create awareness around it, and for the people that are affected by it to be aware, to counter it, to mobilize, and so forth. And in order to do all that, the term Afro-Swedish is very important and useful.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's one other issue that I'd like to raise with regards to Afro-Swedes. You both mentioned generations. In the United States, we had something known as the one-drop rule, where if you had one drop of Afro-Swedish or African ancestry, blood in your ancestry, you were considered black. And I noticed that other ethnic groups in the United States, they don't have a problem with identifying with their so-called one-drop rule. You ask the average American about his ancestry, he'll be glad to tell you that he's Italian American or he's Swedish, German, Huguenot. But some people, especially here in Europe, transfer that to Europe, and I've read and I've attended meetings where some people of African diaspora descent or Afro descent reject this notion. But to my mind, the so-called one-drop rule gave people an identity. It was used wrongly, of course. It was used to segregate and to create laws.
Yeah.
But do you think that there's a useful debate in this? Who can call himself, or who can self-identify as an Afro-Swede? Is there anything useful in the debate?
Well, I can subscribe to what Michael said about the usefulness of this terminology, Afro-Swedes. As such, it can help us to mobilize ourselves against the xenophobia and racism that exists in this country, has always existed. It's a good thing, to have the terminology. But at the same time, as I stated before, I have my reservations. That's because that, some people, as you said, maybe wouldn't like to be associated with the African continent. If they are born and bred in here, they don't speak a single African language, they don't have that much cultural heritage from the African continent, and you're just putting this label on them, you are African. If they don't want to identify themselves with that terminology, they should be allowed to call themselves whatever they want, on an individual level. And the other thing, I don't like with this terminology, Afro-Swedes, is that it's the only group in Sweden which is called Afro-Swedes. You don't hear Euro-Swedes or Latino Swedes or Asian Swedes. The African continent has about 54 different countries. You have Somali Swedes, Eritrea Swedes, Ethiopia Swedes. All these varieties are always, put together, and we call them Afro-Swedes. Of course, it's good, to have one common background, the African continent, but at the same time, we have to emphasize the variety, the hybridity that exists in the African continent. So I would say it helps, for the time being, but I don't see any healthy debate, questioning this. The terminology is always taken negatively, you are Afro-Swedes and you have to live with it, There is no any space, for a healthy exchange of viewpoints or whatever you call it. And the other thing is, as you said, this one drop blood in Africa, if you have a black blood, then even if it's 1%, you are always a black person. Despite the fact that maybe you are 99% white person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it gives you, sort of a reflection, why do people who have, 50-50 background, black and white, they still are forced to get back to their black roots. They don't go to the white roots, It's because, the white institutions are not welcoming them. It becomes sort of, protection. You look back to your roots, and maybe the African culture or the black culture is more open. It allows you to come into. Even Obama is a 50% black, 50% white. He actually grew up in a white environment. His grandmother, his language is English. There's no any African in him as such, culturally, but he's still called a black man. So I think it has to do with this, universal ideology we have, that black man in this hierarchy is not up. So it becomes, that you try to protect yourself, you try to strengthen yourself, and then you strengthen it through your roots. So you go back to your roots and you call yourself Afro-Swede. I can subscribe to it, but we have to de-dramatize it and deconstruct it and allow individuals to have their own identities on their own premises and their own conditions. It's not something you impose on people. People have to be able to grow on their own way.
Michael?
I would like to return to, what I said before about the term Afro-Swedish being a political term. And, I think that is crucial. And now the two most common, I think, criticisms against, and this has also been, I think, the two most common criticisms in Sweden lately against what has been termed identity politics. I do not like that term, especially as it is used in Sweden. It is very misleading for several reasons. Perhaps not something to get into now, but a criticism against such terms like Afro-Swedish and the fixation, so-called fixation with identity that has become popular in popular discourse in Sweden these days, that it leads to racial thinking, in a very crude and backward biological kind of way, ideas of race biology, and that there are innate differences, and that if you belong to a certain race, you have certain determined characteristics and all that. That is backward, and also that by pushing for, say, a term like Afro-Swedish and an identity as Afro-Swedish, if you will, then that is oppressive to the individuals because it's too collectivistic, and so forth. And as Kwame just mentioned, there's a risk of it downplaying individual differences and also playing into ideas of, say, Africa as being a monolithic continent and so forth. Now, all those criticisms are, I think, totally misconceived. And why I say so is that, someone like myself, for instance, I am very steeped in the whole anti-essentialistic discourse that has been going on, especially since the 1990s. I know all the theories, all the arguments inside out, and I know all of all the dangers and so forth of race thinking and so on. And although I subscribe to the pointing out the dangers and so forth, I do not draw the same conclusions. And so and why that is precisely because of political reasons. And that is because we live in a world, we live in a society that is racially stratified, where people of African descent receive the major brunt of discrimination, marginalization, and so forth. We live in a world that is still very much colonially ordered, so to speak, right? Where the African continent is the poorest. The African continent remains the most marginalized, where the legacies of colonialism are very much still alive, and where the racial hierarchy is pretty much the same everywhere in the West and everywhere in former European settler colonies, such as in Latin America and so forth. Now, in order to deal with that, in order to situate oneself in that situation, to be clear-minded about it, and to be able to confront it and challenge it, a term like Afro-Swedish, and also terms like people of African descent, terms like black, are useful and I think crucial, critical. That is not to downplay differences at all. It is not to say that we should encourage some kind of group oppression and a demand of everyone that they have to identify in a certain way and so forth. We, of course, should be open to the differences that do exist and acknowledge them and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we need to be conscious and we need to find a way to move the situation forward.